This presentation is about a study to validate Mindfulness Attention Awareness Scale, the short version, in a sample of Sri Lankan people. It was actually done as a master's dissertation at SERP. The introduction to this is mindfulness-based interventions are widely used and researched, as we all know, and a key area of research is measuring mindfulness, both for purposes of defining the construct and assessing effectiveness of interventions. Mindfulness-based work can be broadly classified into these components, defining conceptual definition and also operational definition derived from that conceptual definition, developing interventions, understanding the causal pathways by which these interventions lead to positive psychological outcomes. Now, measuring mindfulness is related to all these components. The definitions determine the measuring instruments, the measurement procedures, and the measurements are needed to understand the causal pathways and positive outcomes. Over a dozen instruments for measuring mindfulness have been developed in the last 3 to 4 decades, and MAS, Mindfulness Attention Awareness Scale, is one of the most widely used and researched. There has been a growing interest in developing shorter versions of MAS. 3 short versions have been developed, and in Sri Lanka, very few psychological instruments have been validated. But the concept of mindfulness is drawn from Buddhism, which is deeply ingrained, integrated in the Sri Lankan culture. So the potential use in interventions and in processes like meditation is quite high, and research across cultures is clearly needed in validating these instruments. And therefore, this study aimed to assess the psychometric properties of MAS short in a Sri Lankan population. The study design was a cross-sectional survey with a sample of 457 persons, a little over half drawn from universities, university students, about a third working people, mostly in the private sector, middle to senior level managers, and those attending meditation centers regularly, a few selected centers in Colombo. And the sample was 319 females, 129 males. The 2 measures were used in the study. One was the MAS short, translated into Sinhala, and the other was the WHO called the BREF, WHO Quality of Life Questionnaire, which has been cross-culturally validated in a large number of countries, including Sri Lanka. The short version has 29 questions. Statistical analysis, the preliminary analytic procedure was followed, and reliability was assessed using item total correlation, Cronbach's alpha, squared multiple correlation, and then also the temporal stability was assessed using a test-retest measure. Construct validity was assessed using correlation with WHO called BREF questionnaire, which has 4 domains: physical, psychological, social, and environmental. Actually, because there are only a few instruments that are validated in Sri Lanka, there was a very limited choice for an external measure. The factor structure of MAS short was also assessed using confirmatory factor analysis. Spaces version 20 was used for the statistical analysis, and LISREL 9.1 was used for assessing for the CFA, confirmatory factor analysis, and WHO called software for editing and computing is available to be downloaded from a WHO site. So first let me give a brief introduction to the MAS questionnaire. mass scale has 15 items, and these 15 items are negatively worded. The argument was that negative wording and also reverse scoring have certain defects, certain disadvantages. So Hoffling and others used the German translation to identify, they first identified the 5 most valid questions out of the 15 using multi-trait, multi-method analysis. Then they formulated the mirror questions, the positive mirror questions. And so they had 5 negatively worded questions from mass, and there are 5 opposite positively worded mirror questions. And these are the negatively worded questions. I find it difficult to stay focused on what is happening in the present. Because mindfulness is defined very briefly as attention to what's happening in the present moment and awareness of what is happening in the present moment, but of course there are other elements. The second one, it seems I'm running on automatic without much awareness of what I'm doing. Third, I do jobs or tasks automatically without being aware of what I'm doing. I find myself listening to someone with one ear doing something else at the same time. Actually, this question was very problematic. I find myself doing things without paying attention. So mainly attention, awareness are the aspects captured in these questions. So Mass Short had 10 questions, these 5, and they are positively worded mirror questions. The descriptive statistics, the mean score, the minimum was 2, the maximum was 6. The score is actually the arithmetic sum of all the scores. Each item was ranked from 1 to 6. 1 meaning almost always, meaning mindless state, and 6 meaning almost never. So maximum 6, and the mean was 4.4. Mean was 4.4. Slight negative skewness and a slight positive skewness, not too deviated from a normal distribution. And the item total correlations and the Cronbach's alpha, if you look at the Cronbach's alpha, 0.806, a value more than 0.8 provides is a good measure of the internal consistency of an instrument, and the lowest value of the corrected item total correlation there are the N4, that's 0.806, so it doesn't make a difference. The other one is 0.820, so that's the question that reduces the internal consistency. However, for the rest of the study, that question was retained because it only had 10 items, and if we removed one question, its negatively worded question also had to be removed, so it was retained in the analysis. And the model fit was carried out. The test for the model fit, confirmatory factor analysis was carried out, and the first 2 indicators, chi-square to DF ratio, should be less than 3 for a good fit, and root mean square error also should be less than 0.6. But in this case, those 2 exceeded the cutoff. But the rest of the goodness of fit indicators were within the accepted norms. Actually, it should be 0.95 according to some guidelines, but something exceeding 0.9 gives an acceptable fit. Some other studies, in fact, when the Mass Short German version was tested by its authors, Hoffling and others, they got chi-squared by DF of 4.18. So just wanted to compare. And this is the confirmatory factor analysis factor structure, because what Hoffling and others said was that if you have only negatively worded questions, it's unidimensional, and anyway Mass was capturing only one aspect of mindfulness. By having positively worded questions, which actually reflect in a way the mindfulness, and the negatively worded questions which reflect mindlessness, as they called it. And the 5 questions capture the latent constructs of these positive and negative aspects of mindfulness. Again, you can see this 0.20 giving us problems, and that was the question about doing something while listening to someone. So external validity or construct validity was quite good. You can see the correlation between the 4 domains of the WHO called questionnaire: physical, psychological, social, environmental well-being, and mass short score. So 0.514 is quite good. So the psychological well-being measured in the WHO call and mindfulness measured in mass correlated very well, and the physical component, physical well-being, also correlated very well. The retest reliability or the temporal stability was also very good. Subsample of 65 was administered the questionnaire 3 weeks later. Then we got a Pearson-Spearman correlation coefficient of 0.71. Group differences were tested. There was no gender difference. There was a significant, though small, correlation with age and degree or higher levels of education differed a little bit, higher level being a little more mindfulness, and students versus working people, these are correlated as you can see, but non-meditating versus meditating also there was a difference. And meditating, this difference could only be found among people who meditated or who reported meditating for at least 180 minutes per week for over 3 years. So fairly consistent and intense meditation. So the inference or the conclusion is that mass short singular version shows good internal reliability and constructed validity and an acceptable model fit. There are limitations. It's a convenient sample. A more rigorous method could have been used. Where one of the key difficulties was the semantic interpretation. The question about listening to someone while doing something else was interpreted as something good in this culture when I spoke to people after answering the question. Whereas the original authors of mass interpreted it as something of being in a mindless state. You don't give your full attention to listening, you also do something else. Whereas people here thought that's something good to do. That's a skill. And we had to use only one internal measure. So I'll just leave it at that.